U.S. Army Rangers 1989 to 2015 Panama to Afghanistan. Introduction. The story of the modern U.S. Army 75th Ranger Regiment is one of hard-fought evolution. While maintaining both its traditional operational roles and the links that it proudly claims to the original Rangers of the French Indian War in the 1750s, in the 21st century the regiment has charted a dramatic new course for itself by demonstrating its prowess and potential. This book serves as an updating sequel to Gordon L. Rotman's masterful Elite 13 U.S. Army Rangers and LRRP Units, 1942 to 1987, published by Osprey nearly 30 years ago, and thus the earlier history of the Rangers will be touched upon. The modern incarnation of the Rangers grew from the cauldron of World War II. The 1st Ranger Battalion was formed 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, modeled upon and initially trained by the British commandos to conduct raiding missions behind enemy lines. Indeed, the first combat action in which a few Rangers took part was alongside the British and Canadians in the bloody Dieppe raid. On the French coast, in August 1942, 6 U.S. Ranger battalions eventually saw service during the war in North Africa, Italy, Europe, and the Pacific. They were often tasked with securing beaches and landing zones, or capturing terrain to allow following forces to exploit their gains. Perhaps best known and most characteristic of the Ranger spirit was the assault against the German artillery position at Pointe du Hoc, Normandy, on June 6, 1944, by a Call James Rutter's 2nd Ranger Battalion. Here, after an POSE, amphibious landing, they scaled under fire a steep 90-foot cliff using ropes and grappling hooks. When they reached the top and engaged the defenders, the Rangers discovered that the Germans had moved the artillery some 600 yards inland. Clearing the battery position and patrolling southward, they found the guns and succeeded in disabling them. Although reduced to little more than company strength, the battalion established a perimeter and subsequently fought off numerous counterattacks until relieved 2 days later. In the Pacific Theater, on January 30, 1945, Rangers also carried out one of the largest prisoner of war POW rescues in history. After a long jungle approach march and a rendezvous with Filipino guerrillas, LTCOL Henry A. Mucci led a reinforced company of his 6th Ranger BN in an attack against a POW camp at Cabanatuan on Luzon, where prisoners were in danger of execution by retreating Japanese forces. The raiders successfully freed and escorted to safety more than 500 Allied POs, inflicting heavy Japanese casualties for the loss of only 2 Rangers killed and 10 wounded. After World War II, the U.S. Army saw no continuing need for special operations forces, and the Rangers were disbanded. Early in the Korean War, the formation of volunteer airborne Ranger companies was ordered, and a Ranger Training Center Airborne was established at Fort Benning, Georgia, in September 1950. By February 1951, some 17 companies had been raised, of which 6 deployed in Korea, but for various reasons they were inactivated. Soon afterward, a Ranger training facility was maintained, however, contributing to the creation of Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, LRRP, companies in the 1950s-60s, modeled on the British Special Air Service. Says these later proliferated due to the demands of the Vietnam War. In 1960, the Rangers' historical lineage and battle honors had been granted to the new U.S. Army Special Forces, so in 1969, the LRRP companies were granted the lineage of the 75th Infantry Regiment, inheritors of the identity of the wartime 475th Infantry Regiment Merrill's Marauders, who had earned renown in Burma. While continuing to deploy separately, all LRRP units were redesignated as companies of the 75th Infantry and added Ranger to their titles. The post-Vietnam administrative history of these companies was complex. But on January 31, 1974, the 1st Battalion Ranger, 75th Infantry was activated at Fort Benning, followed that October by the 2D Battalion at Fort Lewis, Washington. These units were to be trained to a high standard as light infantry for direct action missions of limited duration in a wide range of physical environments. These missions would include raids against high-value targets, including airfields and command, control, and communications facilities, and the interdiction of lines of communication. Originally, they were also intended for both LRRP and rear area security tasks, but these were later dropped, being replaced laterally by support for counter-terrorist operations and hostage rescue missions. To meet these requirements, intense, diversified unit training would be accompanied by instruction in specialist individual skills beyond those normally mastered by conventional infantry. Following the failure of Operation Eagle Claw, the attempted rescue of hostages from the occupied U.S. Embassy in Tehran, Iran in April 1980, that December, the U.S. Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, was established to coordinate highly classified preparations and operations by special mission units. The SMUs that have been publicly identified are the U.S. Army's 1st SD Special Forces Operations Detachment Delta, Naval Special Warfare Development Group DevGRU or SEAL Team 6, and the U.S. Air Force's 24th Special Tactics Squadron. Units from the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment and 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment SOAR come under JSOC control when they are deployed as part of Joint Special Operations Task Forces. On October 25, 1983, as part of Operation Urgent Fury, some 500 men from the 1st and 2D Ranger BNs parachuted onto Point Salines Airport on the Caribbean island of Grenada to secure the safety of some 360 U.S. students during a period of bloody unrest. Following this success, a 3D at Ranger BN and regimental HQ elements were activated at Fort Benning on October 3, 1984. On April 17, 1986, the 75th INF Regiment Ranger was redesignated the 75th Ranger Regiment and presented with the lineage and honors of the World War II and Korean War Ranger units, RIP, RASP, and the regiment. Ranger School is a famous institution within the U.S. Army, which since the 1950s has taught company officers and NCOs infantry patrol and small unit tactics and leadership in the field. It is not a selection or training program for the 75th Ranger Regiment, but is open to all within the U.S. Army, and indeed to selected students from other services. 1. The course is challenging, and graduation rates since 2007 have been less than 50%. All who complete the 61-day course and earn the Ranger's shoulder tab are considered Rangers. Whether or not they serve within the 75th Ranger Regiment, known simply as the regiment. Conversely, not all those who serve within the regiment have to complete Ranger School, although advancement within the regiment depends on gaining the tab, and it is mandatory for Ranger officers and sergeants. Soldiers must complete a separate and very rigorous selection program before they can hope to earn the coveted Tan Beret and Ranger Unit Scroll of the 75th Ranger Regiment. For the Ranger tab and unit scrolls, see Plate B. Known until 2010 as the Ranger Indoctrination Program RIP, the selection process for enlisted soldiers and junior NCOs grades E1 to E5 is now called the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program RASP, Level 1, and is run by the Ranger Selection and Training Company, part of the Regimental Special Troops Battalion C Below organization. RIP was a 4-week program. The 4th week, with an emphasis on combat shooting, was added in 2004. Its replacement RASP lasts 8 weeks in total, divided into 2 distinct phases. C Below. Again, dropout rates among candidates are high. RASP-1. Intakes, especially in wintertime, have historically suffered anything up to 75% attrition during the program. Since senior NCOs, warrant officers, and officers in the 75th Ranger Regiment must have already passed Ranger School, there are ASP-2 selection lasts only 21 days. Candidates must be airborne qualified before they begin RASP. They must also complete a pre-RASP program that ensures the candidate meets Basic Ranger requirements. The first half of RASP is similar to the older RIP and is principally concerned with assessing the physical and psychological capacity of a candidate to become a Ranger. Some formal instruction is included in core small arms. The M4A1 rifle, the MK46, M240B and M2, machine guns, and the standard enemy AK-47 assault rifle. Parachute refresher training is also given, together with instruction in Ranger history and traditions and the Ranger First Responder RFR Field First Aid course. The second phase is more instructional, with a week spent on advanced marksmanship and close-quarter battle CQB shooting. Breacher course, which teaches basic explosive and manual breaching techniques. The Special Operations Combatives program for hand-to-hand combat and mobility training with the Ranger version of the ADVET Ground Mobility Vehicle GMV, the Special Operations variant of the High Mobility Multipurpose Wheeled Vehicle Light Truck EMMWV, aka the Humvee. More recently, this segment includes familiarization with the M1126 Stryker Infantry, Carrier Vehicle ICV, and various mine-resistant, mush-protected MIR platforms. In essence, Phase 2 prepares the potential Ranger for combat, since he may be deployed almost immediately after graduation and posting to a Ranger battalion. Once the Ranger has successfully completed RASP-1, those with a communications military occupational specialty, MOS, including forward observers, will be sent to the 3-week Ranger Radio Telephone Operator RTO course. Medics who pass RASP go on to advanced training at the 6-week Pre-Special Operations Combat Medic course to prepare them for the 9-month Special Operations Combat Medic course. At the completion of these courses, Ranger medics are better qualified than their civilian counterparts. Rangers may also attend the Ranger Language program and any number of specialist military schools, including Military Freefall, Scuba, and Survival. Evasion Resistance Escape SEER School. After a minimum of 8 months within the regiment, non-tabbed Rangers will be given the opportunity to attend the 3-week Small Unit Ranger Tactics CERT course as a precursor to attending Ranger School. Organization today, the regiment is composed of 3 numbered Ranger battalions, 175th at Hunter Army Airfield in Georgia, 275ths at Fort Lewis, Washington State, and 375ths at Fort Benning, Georgia. A Regimental Special Troops Battalion, RSTB, is also based at Fort Benning, under the regimental headquarters. The RSTB was raised in 2006. To support the 3 Ranger battalions with specialist capabilities, it is an enabler, allowing the regiment to conduct longer-term deployments, capable of a full range of special operations missions. The RSTB comprises 4 companies: the Ranger Reconnaissance Company, RRC, the Ranger Communications Company, which provides state-of-the-art communications support, the Ranger Military Intelligence Company, which conducts human signals and imagery, intelligence gathering, and analysis directly for the battalions, and the Ranger Selection and Training Company responsible for RAS and CERT. Each Ranger battalion is today composed of a headquarters and headquarters company. It's 4 rifle companies, the 4th D Company being added in 2007 due to the heightened operational tempo of the regiment's deployments, and since 2005, a logistics support company, E Company. A mortar platoon under the battalion HQ has 81 mm and 120 mm tubes that can be attached as needed to individual rifle companies and platoons. Each rifle company comprises 3 rifle platoons and a weapons platoon. The weapons platoon provides organic company-level indirect fire support from a section of 2 60 mm mortars and anti-tank at support from 3 at teams equipped with the 84 mm M3 Carl Gustaf Ranger anti-tank weapons system RAS recoilless rifle, the FGM-148 Javelin anti-tank, guided missile a TGM, and the disposable 84 mm a T4M136 unguided anti-tank weapon. Prior to the end of the 1990s, the weapons platoon was also home to a sniper section, which has since been reorganized into a sniper platoon at battalion level. Each rifle platoon consists of a headquarters, including the platoon leader, platoon sergeant, an RTO, 3 rifle squads, and a weapons squad 3X. 2-man machine gun teams and a squad leader. A Ranger rifle squad at full strength is composed of 9 men split into 2 fire teams, depending on operational needs. The squad is supported by a machine gun team from the weapons squad, and sometimes by a 3-man anti-tank team drawn from the company's weapons platoon. A 60mm mortar team may also be attached, although these are often grouped. Other assets are attached according to operational need. A Ranger platoon operating in Afghanistan, for example, would likely have its own military working dog team, at least 1 medic, an interpreter, an explosive, ordnance disposal EOD specialist, a sniper team from the battalion sniper platoon, a forward observer to direct organic mortars or artillery such as the M142 High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, HIMARS, an Air Force, combat controller or Joint Tactical Air Controller, JTAC, and perhaps an attached cultural support team to assist in interaction with Afghan civilians. Operations. Operation Just Cause Panama, 1989. The United States invaded Panama on December 20, 1989 with the objective of securing U.S. citizens who were under threat from the forces of Panamanian Dictamanio Antonio Noriega, who was himself wanted on drug smuggling charges. Operation Just Cause, originally known by the far less dramatic codename of Blue Spoon, would be the first time the entire 75th Ranger Regiment deployed into combat together and featured a major example of one of its traditional roles, the seizure of an airfield against opposition. The Rangers' missions would be some of the most dangerous and most critical of the entire operation. They would also herald the immediate future direction of the regiment, with an emphasis on large-scale raiding parties, intimately supported by the aviators of the 160th SOAR and themselves, operating in immediate support of special mission units such as the Army's Delta Force. This would be the first but far from the last time that the Rangers operated directly under Joint Special Operations Command. The Rangers operated as Task Force Red as they later would in Afghanistan and Iraq. In contrast, the Navy SEALs of Team 6 were typically Task Force Blue, while Delta were Task Force Green. Under this umbrella organization for Panama, the Rangers were further divided into 2 component commands, Task Force Red Romeo and Task Force Red Tango. Romeo was composed of 2 Ranger battalions minus 2 75ths, which provided the Ranger Ready Reaction Force at the time. It's 3 75ths, less its SECO, with accompanying Army PSOPs and USAF Special Tactics elements, along with AH-6 Apache and AH-6 Little Bird helicopter gunships known as Team Wolf. An Air Force AC-130 Spectre gunship orbited on Overwatch High, above. Romeo was tasked with securing the military airfield at Rio Hato to the east, defeating the 2 company-strength Panamanian military elements garrisoned there, and capturing the runways to establish an air bridge for follow-on forces. Tango was built around 175th and SECO of 3 75ths, again supported by PSOPs and USAF Special Tactics teams. A flight of H-6 south from the 160th SOAR, and Tango's mission was to conduct a combat drop to seize the Tocumen, Torrijos International Airport in the west of the island from a company strength element of Panamanian airborne troops. Although the regiment had some local knowledge since they had been practicing the opposed seizure of the Panama Canal locks for some years, they would be hampered by significant intelligence deficiencies, and by having to operate among a teeming civilian population, safety had to be protected at all costs. Both operations saw the Rangers conducting night combat jumps from 500 feet, some 100 feet below the minimum safe height prescribed by the Civilian Federal Aviation Administration, using older non-steerable T-10 parachutes. This led to a large number of jump injuries ranging from sprained ankles to more severe fractures, which were only made worse by the estimated 100 pounds load each Ranger carried. Subsequent adoption of the more advanced T-11 parachute has reduced serious drop zone injuries, including from landing directly on hard tarmac runways to less than 1%. Task Force Red Romeo. At Rio Hato, the Rangers jumped at 103 hours local time on December 20th, after USAF Special Tactics operators infiltrated by MH-6 Little Bird helicopters had placed beacons marking the landing zone. Just under 2 hours later, the Abdalgio was secure enough for the arrival of the first follow-on forces, an F-117A Nighthawk airstrike that was intended to demoralize the airfields. Defenders apparently had the opposite effect, and the C-130 Hercules and 100 to 141 Starlifter transport aircraft were engaged with small arms and 14.5 millimeters. Anti-aircraft fire. 11 of the 13 aircraft sustained damage, and at least one Ranger was hit while still in his aircraft. Unknown to the Rangers, the pair of 2,000 pounds bombs at the F-117, as were assigned to deliver, were dropped some 500 yards from the barracks areas in an attempt to minimize enemy casualties. At least one Zu-232AA gun also fired upon the approaching transport aircraft, but was subsequently destroyed by the AC-130. Once they had landed, the Rangers formed up into platoon elements, with B co-assaulting the barracks under the protective fires of a H-6 South Low overhead. While a co seized an NCO school without bloodshed, other C co-Rangers stormed a nearby beach house owned by Noriega, a mission originally detailed.
Shoot the SEALs.
The Rangers captured some of Noriega's security officers there. After using an AT-4 rocket projectile to breach the front door, the opposition at Rio Hato had proven stronger than expected.
Ow.
The defenders also had the time to block the runway with parked vehicles, which slowed the delivery of the Rangers' vehicles. Despite this, the Rangers inflicted disproportionate casualties upon the defenders, some 34 dead and an unknown number of wounded, compared to 4 Ranger Kia 2 from friendly fire and 27 wounded, including a number who may have been hit by fire from a supporting helicopter gunship. There were also 30 injuries recorded from the jump itself. Several Panamanian armored vehicles were destroyed by the supporting Tu-130, while Ranger blocking elements engaged a number of Panamanian paramilitaries dressed in civilian clothes on the adjoining Pan-American Highway. Task Force Red Tango. The operation to seize the Tocumen, Torrijos International Airport. Omar. Torrijos is the civilian international airport, while Tocumen is an adjoining Panamanian Air Force facility. Saw the Rangers of Tango jump at 0110 hours and run into less resistance than Romeo. A company, 175th, was assigned to Tocumen, where squads destroyed numerous parked aircraft. C Company were tasked with defeating the resident Panamanian Infantry Company, defending the airfield, but thankfully most surrendered. B Company equipped with Rangers Special Operations vehicles, our SOV and dirt bikes, secured the outer perimeter of the airfield. Opposition was comparatively light following preliminary fires from the AC-130, AH-64AS, and AH-6 South, although some shooting occurred in the main terminal building. The target was soon secured. For the loss of 1 Ranger Kia, a medic from 175th, 5 wounded, and just On December 22nd, 375ths also conducted a third airfield seizure at David Airfield, this time inserted by MH-47 Chinook helicopters rather than by parachute. They completed the operation without casualties or shots fired. According to historian Greg Walker, the regiment was originally tasked with another initial mission, the capture or denial of Noriega's personal jet at Patilla Airfield, Panama City. Largely due to inter-service rivalry, the mission was handed to the SEALs of Task Force White, who proceeded to lose 4 dead and 8 wounded when they were caught in crossfire on the main runway and pinned down until a Co. 275ths were deployed to relieve them. Follow-on missions. Individual companies carried out a number of follow-in missions with 2D and 3D BNs, remaining in Panama until January 9th to 10th, 1990. The Rangers were tasked with raiding a number of Noriega's mansions in the hunt for the dictator. In fact, Noriega was almost apprehended by the Rangers on the opening night of the operation near Tucumán, where he had been visiting a prostitute when the Rangers began their parachute assault. Air Force Special Tactics veteran Colonel John T. Carney Jr. relates that a Ranger roadblock team encountered a two-car convoy trying to escape the airfield. The Rangers stopped the first car, but missed the second one. Later, the Ranger regimental commander found out that Manuel Noriega had been in the second vehicle. C Company 375ths conducted clearance operations in and around La Comandancia, the Panamanian Defense Force main headquarters. The Rangers also carried out a number of operations in support of Delta Force, which involved squads fast-roping in to secure a perimeter around a target location. The Rangers would typically deploy at all four corners of a site and establish blocking positions. Their job was to stop enemy reinforcements, or curious civilians, from getting too close, and to watch out for squirters, enemy personnel who might escape the assaulters. This operational template is one that the Rangers conducted many times with Delta, most famously 3 years later in Somalia. In Panama, the first mission with Delta was a raid on Panama prison, where Co 375ths were tasked with establishing blocking positions while the Delta operators conducted a prisoner rescue. The ambitious plan called for 160th Sword Organizers to use their miniguns to engage an amber of guard towers. Once these were silenced, the Rangers would fast rope from MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters and cover Delta's entry and extraction from the prison. As the helicopters approached their target, however, it was discovered that the prison had apparently been abandoned. Instead of fast-roping, the troops landed in the MH-60s, and Delta confirmed that the prison was indeed empty. Another Ranger Delta mission to release political prisoners from a prison on Isla de Coiba also ended in a dry hole. Noriega eventually surrendered on January 4, 1990, after taking refuge in the Papal Nunciatura, and was handed over to the Drug Enforcement Administration. All of the Rangers' assigned missions were successful. They captured over 1,000 prisoners, but lost 5 Rangers killed and suffered 42 wounded. Operation Desert Storm, Arabian Gulf, 1991. Many readers may be unaware that the regiment was even deployed in support of Operation Desert Storm. Given Gen Norman Schwarzkopf's widely reported distaste for Special Operations Forces, SOF, the Rangers struggled to be assigned a role within the wider war effort. However, elements of 175th had been deployed several times in preparation for hostilities during Operation Desert Shield, the initial precautionary defense of Saudi Arabia. One such deployment included a mission to support Delta and the British SAS in a proposed coalition hostage rescue mission to recover civilian human shields held by Saddam Hussein's regime, but thankfully this extremely unpromising plan was aborted. A Joint Special Operations Task Force JSOTF, composed of a JSOC command element, a Delta Squadron, and Co. 175th Rangers, along with accompanying 160th SOAR support, was later deployed to the Gulf Theater Operation Elusive Concept. Gen Schwarzkopf himself capped the Ranger contingent at 150 men, and only agreed to their presence after it was argued that an Iraqi airfield might need to be seized. The JSOTF and its Ranger component were based at a disused commercial airfield at Rar in Saudi Arabia, a site that the Rangers would employ again 12 years later in Operation Iraqi Freedom. After operating as a quick reaction force, QRF for Delta, who had managed to carve out a role-hunting Scud missile launchers in the western Iraqi desert alongside the SAS, the Rangers were finally assigned a mission of their own, and one that fell squarely within their tradition of raiding expertise. Operation Ranger Run 1 was conducted on February 26, 1991 by Co. and elements of a Co. 175th with the objective of destroying a microwave relay tower and associated communications facility near the Jordanian. The British SAS and Special Boat Service SBS had already had some success targeting communications and logistics facilities supporting the SCUDs, and it was felt that the Ranger target could have an impact on the command and control of these Iraqi ballistic missiles, whose use against Israel threatened to weaken the Rangers were split into a fire support element of some 15 men equipped with M60 medium machine guns, M249 squad automatic weapons, SAW, and M3 Carl Gustaf, a security and blocking element, and a headquarters team, all in a pair of MH-6OL Blackhawks flown by the 160th SOA. The main assault party, a 42-man reinforced rifle platoon, embarked in a USA FMH-53J PAVE low helicopter and 4 AH-6G Little Birds would provide aerial close support. The first actual Rangers from the mission to enter Iraq were a squad, signed to provide local security for an MH-47 that flew in a refueling bladder to establish a forward area refueling point FARP for the short range AH-6S. The communications site itself was defended by a number of nearby Iraqi 60 anti-aircraft guns, which were destroyed by an airstrike by NEAT USA FF-15E Strike Eagles immediately prior to the arrival of the helicopters carrying the Rangers. The AH-6 South conducted 2 minutes of preliminary fires upon the objective to suppress any opposition to the Rangers firing their miniguns before following up with a pair of 2.75 and unguided rockets fired into the main building. According to historian and retired U.S. Army General Daniel Bolger, the MH-6OLs landed some 100 yards from the facility to establish a perimeter and overwatch position. The chain-link gate was blown in by an 84mm Ross round. The main raiding party then landed and proceeded to clear the buildings, and under the expert tutelage of 2 attached Army Special Forces breachers, attached over 50 demolition charges
out the structure.
With the timer set, the Rangers climbed back aboard their helicopters and withdrew without loss. The raiding party had been on the ground for just 20 minutes. Ironically, however, although the charges 18 detonated as designed, the main microwave tower did not actually collapse till several days after the ceasefire was declared. 2. After the cessation of hostilities, 175th conducted one final mission along with the regimental headquarters company under Operation Iris Gold. They conducted a parachute drop into liberated Kuwait in December 1991 as a show of force to discourage any further Iraqi aggression. Operation Gothic Serpent, Somalia, 1993. Known within the regiment as the Battle of the Black Sea, the Rangers' next combat deployment is still perhaps their most famous, largely due to the book and later film Black Hawk Down, which described the actions of BCO 375th in October. The United States had become a key partner in a United Nations humanitarian mission in Somalia, operating under the auspices of UNISOM. To United Nations operation in Somalia to alleviate mass famine in that. Complicating the humanitarian mission in this failed state was the continuing conflict between rival warlords and criminal gangs, who stole aid supplies and targeted UN peacekeepers. Chief amongst these was Mohammed Farah, Aidid of the powerful Haber Getter clan, the leader of the militant Somali National Alliance, SNA. When SNA gunmen killed 24 Pakistani peacekeepers, the UN was forced to act. The Americans, as the largest force element in Operation Restore Hope, passed the mission to JSOC, and a JSOTF was deployed. Task Force Ranger followed a similar pattern to Operation Elusive, concept in Saudi Arabia a couple of years previously. It included a command element, 2 platoons, and a headquarters from BCO 375th Rangers Deltas. CSQN, a team of surveillance operators from Task Force Orange, and an aviation component from the 160th SOAR. A number of snipers were also attached from SEAL Team 6. Controversially, no AC-130s were assigned to the task force, although 4 had earlier been assigned to support the UN and nor were any armored vehicles. If armor was required, Task Force Ranger would have to rely upon the Pakistani and Malaysian UN contingents. 3. In an after-action review, Lt. Thomas D. Tomaso, the platoon leader of BCO's 2D-PTN, explained the role of the Ranger component of the task force. The Rangers were to insert with, or just prior to, the assault elements. The objective was defined as the building complex, or vehicle, that a specific target person was in. Specifically, we would isolate it. By preventing the crowds from influencing the assault, the targets from escaping the objective area, and any militia or armed civilians from reinforcing the objective area. The Rangers were divided into 15-man helicopter chalks derived from the World War II use of chalk numbers to show paratroopers, which were their assigned aircraft drawn from 1st and 2D PTNs, who would establish blocking positions with each chalk taking one corner of an objective, while 3D PTN were mounted in ground vehicles to provide an extraction force for a strong point assault. The task force naturally preferred to operate at night, when both their technological and training advantages were maximized and risk to their helicopters from AA and rocket-propelled grenade RPG fire was reduced. However, Task Force Ranger's first operation ended in confusion. On August 30th, 1993, intelligence indicated a former United Nations compound was being used by ID'd supporters. Delta conducted a nighttime helicopter assault that netted a number of UN personnel who were still based at the location, but no SNA militia. The international media had a field day with the story, ensuring that the presence of Task Force Ranger in Somalia became worldwide news. Their second mission, on September 7th, again involved a helicopter assault, force striking in the hours of darkness. Delta detained a large number of suspects without a fight, though the ground convoy dispatched to pick up the prisoners received some small arms and RPG fire. The third operation used a ground assault force in unarmored Humvees to detain an individual thought to be ID'd, but who turned out to be a pro-UN former police chief. Although this operation was launched in daylight due to the time sensitivity of Thet or Git, no shots were fired. On September 17th, the task force reverted to their normal nighttime operations and struck a site near the infamous Bakara market, which housed a radio transmitter used by ID'd to transmit orders to his followers. This time, the task force arrived in ground vehicles, with a pair of Black Hawks carrying Delta snipers providing overwatch from above. In daylight the following day, Task Force Ranger went after Osman Aliato, a key ID'd advisor. His place of business, a garage, was raided by an assault force that arrived in Little Birds, and Black Hawks and a number of suspects were detained, but the raid missed Atto himself. Varying the template, the prisoners were extracted by helicopter while the assault force left via a ground convoy. Again, they took small arms and RPG fire. The task force finally got their man on their sixth mission, launched on September 21st. Actionable but time-sensitive intelligence sent them out in daylight once again, and a helicopter assault force attempted to stop a convoy of suspect vehicles by peppering their engine blocks with minigun fire. There, targets raced from the cars before the Rangers and Delta operators were in a position to capture them. The mission then switched to a strong point assault. Delta stormed a number of surrounding buildings, finally taking Atto into custody and loading their prisoners into the helicopters to be flown back to the UN base. The Rangers and Delta believed that if they struck with speed, aggression, and surprise, they could exfiltrate from the target safely before the Somalis had a chance to organize a concerted resistance, even during daylight. Aidid was evidently beginning to feel the pinch. He was quoted as saying at the time, "Those people, Task Force Ranger, are horribly and dangerous." The Battle of the Black Sea. Task Force Ranger's seventh and final mission would be launched on the afternoon of Sunday, October 3rd, 1993. It followed an established plan known as the Strong Point Assault Template. As already described, the task force had also conducted operations following another template known as the Convoy Assault, where stopped vehicles were stopped by AH-6 gunships while operators fast-roped to the ground and swarmed the targets. The task force had intentionally varied the operational templates too. avoid tipping off IDAD's followers, in some cases using helicopters to extract the assault force, in others linking up with a vehicle column, or even deploying helicopters as a feint while a ground assault was mounted. On October 3rd, intelligence indicated that at least 2 key leadership targets would be attending a Klan meeting in a 3-story house 1 block away from the Olympic Hotel and a mile and a quarter from the Bakara market area. That was described by the commander of U.S. forces in Somalia as Indian country. At 1,542 hours local time, for MH6 South landed Delta assaulters around the perimeter of the target building, and the operation began. While the operators cleared the building and captured their targets, our Ranger Chalks fast-roped from 4 MH6 OLS to establish blocking positions around the target building amid swirling dust clouds kicked up by the helicopter's rotor downwash. 2 other MH6 OLs inserted additional assaulters right on the objective before returning to orbit the area with Delta snipers providing aerial overwatch for the teams on the ground. The 7th MH6 OL flew high above the battle space, carrying the command element for the Task Force Ranger. A final MH6 OL orbited overhead carrying the CSAR team made up of Rangers, Delta medics, and Air Force Special Tactics operators that would become a vital part of the mission. 4 AH-6S provided gunship support. If all went according to plan, the ground assault force and a dozen unarmored Humvees and M939 5-ton trucks would arrive at the objective, load up the prisoners and the assault force, and head back. The mission was projected to last 30 to 40 minutes. As most readers will know from the book and film, the Delta assaulters successfully secured their objective and captured their targets, the Rangers. 3D PTN had also safely arrived with a ground convoy to transport everyone back to their base at Mogadishu Airport. As this was occurring, a young Ranger inexplicably missed the fast rope and plunged some 40 feet to the ground. He was immediately declared a litter urgent casualty, meaning that his injuries were serious enough to require priority evacuation. All of the Ranger Chalks were receiving small arms fire by this time, and smoke trails from RPGs crisscrossed the sky around the helicopters. A large mob of armed civilians and militia gunmen were approaching the objective from the north. Super 6-1, a Black Hawk carrying Delta sniper teams, was vectored in to try to drive the mob back with its rotor downwash, but as it approached, it was struck by an RPG. Super 6-1, nicknamed Thunderstruck by its crew, was down. One of the Ranger Chalks raced toward the crash site as the CSAR helicopter, Super 6-8, hovered overhead to fast rope its team in to secure the downed Black Hawk, and an MH6 made a courageous landing in the street to rescue 2 seriously wounded Delta snipers, even as the CSAR element fast-roped and another RPG struck the tail of Super 6-8. The pilots managed to keep the aircraft level while the last man abs to the ground before heading back to base trailing billowing smoke. The CSAR team immediately began taking fire and casualties as the Rangers and Delta operators tried to establish a security perimeter around the downed Super 6-1 to allow the CSAR pro-rescue jumpers and medics to begin to try to stabilize the wounded. Both pilots were already dead, but the team recovered the 2 wounded crew chiefs and 2 other wounded Delta operators. The vehicle-borne 3D PTN, led in person by the battalion commander, Call Danny McKnight, were now ordered to drive, still with their prisoners, to the Black Hawk crash site. A convoy of 3 Humvees had left earlier. The injured Ranger who had fallen from the fast rope, McKnight's mom, ran into roadblocks and continual ambushes as they attempted to mock their way to the crash site. 1 man was shot dead, as was a second Ranger with the 3 vehicles still heading for the airport. Progress was also hampered by the delay in receiving directions from an orbiting U.S. Navy P-3 surveillance aircraft, which could only pass directions through the Ranger Joint Operations Center, not directly to McKnight, so by the time directions reached him, his convoy had already passed the required turning, with 3 of his vehicles hit by RPGs and immobilized, increasingly low on ammunition. and with the majority of his Rangers wounded, some critically, the battalion. Coe made the difficult decision to return to the airport. The second Black Hawk down. Barely 20 minutes after the first helicopter was shot down, a second MH-60L, Calcine Super 64, was struck by an RPG and crash-landed about half a mile from the first crash site. With the only CSAR element already committed, AH-6 South flew repeated gun runs to keep back the mobs that raced toward the downed helicopter. When it became evident that reaching the site with a ground rescue force would take some time, 2 Delta snipers were eventually given authorization to be inserted near it. The snipers managed to fight their way to Super 64, dragged the 4-man crew from the wreckage, and heroically defended the crash site until, having run out of ammunition and using recovered weapons and their pistols, both were shot and killed by the sea of Somali militia and incensed civilians. The injured Black Hawk pilot was spared a similar fate and, miraculously, would survive and captured alive. A contingent of Rangers from the airport and a quick reaction force, drawn from the 10th Mountain Division, attempted independently to reach the second crash site, but both were driven back and retreated to the airport, with more wounded. Instead, the 99 Rangers and Delta operators who had moved to the original Super 61 crash site defended it all night against encircling militias while attempting to free the body of the pilot, which was jammed in the wreckage. A combined UN and 10th MTN Div relief column, mounted in armored vehicles, arrived just before 200 hours the next morning, fighting their way to the first crash site and linking up with the men of TF Ranger. Soon afterwards, the relief force managed to reach the second crash site, but finding no bodies, they destroyed the helicopter with thermite grenades. The men of Task Force Ranger finally escaped the city a little after 0600 hours. Some Rangers were forced to run what became known as the Mogadishu Mile, as there was no space left in the vehicles. A raid that had been predicted to last barely half an hour had descended to a 14-hour pitched battle, resulting in 6 Rangers and 5 Delta operators dead. A 6th would tragically be killed 2 days later by a random mortar strike. 5 aviators from the 160th SOA are dead, and 2 soldiers from the 10th MTN Div relief force dead. More than 80 U.S. personnel, mainly Rangers, were wounded. The captured pilot of the downed Super 64 was released after 11 days captivity. Aftermath. Their experiences in Mogadishu would give rise to significant changes in Ranger equipment and training. While Delta purchased the 6-wheeled Pander armored ground mobility system, the Rangers looked at a number of portable armored vehicles before. In 2005, they took delivery of a number of Stryker M11268 8-wheeled ICVs. Initially on temporary loan, these armored vehicles would transport them on their predominantly urban raiding missions. In Iraq, the Rangers also soon adopted the more compact M4 carbine, better suited for urban combat, in preference to the longer M16A2 rifles they had carried in Somalia. Their experiences also fostered advances in new types of body armor, ballistic helmets, and medical technology. In terms of training, the Battle of the Black Sea led to a renewed focus on physical endurance, medical combat, lifesaver skills, and CQB shooting. This took place particularly under the leadership of Colonel Stanley McChrystal, who commanded the regiment between 1997 and 1999, and who would go on to be an important figure in its future deployments. In many ways, the grim experience of Operation Gothic Serpent shaped and prepared the regiment for its coming fights in the War on Terror. Somalia was the last large-scale deployment for the Rangers in the 1990s. Under Operation Amber Star, Rangers from Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment RRD Team 2 deployed in small numbers to Bosnia and Kosovo, in support of both the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy special mission units involved in the hunt for war criminals, often maintaining long-term covert observation posts to develop pattern-of-life intelligence on the targets. The use of the RRD in such operations was another glimpse into the future. The detachment, known informally as Rex within the regiment, also deployed to Haiti in advance of a planned 1994 Ranger combat drop that was aborted at the last minute. The regiment, alongside Delta and SEAL Team 6, also trained for a new role prompted by the breakup of the Soviet Union, seizing the nuclear missile facilities of rogue states, a mission they have thankfully never been 26 called upon to conduct. Tragically, the commanding officers of both 175th, 375ths were killed, along with a number of other Rangers in a 1992 helicopter crash during one such counter-proliferation exercise. Operation Enduring Freedom Afghanistan, 2001 to present day, is the aftermath of the attacks on the United States on September 11, 2001, would see the Rangers deployed on non-stop combat operations for more than a decade in the global war on terror. Their first theater was Afghanistan, the haven for the al-Qaeda terrorists responsible for the devastating attacks on 9/11s. The Rangers again deployed as part of a JSOC task force, this time known as Task Force Sword. Following the covert insertion of Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and Army Special Forces teams, the regiment was called upon to conduct an operation that remains controversial to this day: the seizure of a disused desert airstrip codenamed Objective Rhino, south of Kandahar, in southern Afghanistan. 4. The nighttime combat drop, the regiment's first since Panama was made. On October 19, 2001, when ANC caused 375ths and command elements from both 375ths and the regimental HQ parachuted from 800 feet. The increased height meant that this time the Rangers suffered only 2 jump-related injuries. The target, apparently the private airstrip of a hunting lodge owned by an Emirati prince, received a preliminary bombardment by both B-2A Spirit bombers and a C-130 gunships. It was swiftly captured by the Rangers, with only one lone enemy shot and killed, although, according to U.S. Special Operations Command SOCOM history, a further 11 were killed in the preparatory airstrikes. In a piece of PSOP's theater aimed at warning the enemy that the United States military could strike at any time, anywhere in Afghanistan, the operation was filmed and segments released to the media. The inclusion of a combat camera crew on the mission meant that the Rangers lost an integral component of their standard airfield seizure package: a pair of H-6 gunships that would be flown into the objective as soon as the runway was secured to provide intimate close air support for the Rangers. The Rangers at Objective Rhino spread out to seize 4 separate objectives codenamed Tin, Iron, Copper, and Cobalt. Similar names for objectives would be used during later Ranger operations in Iraq. Some 26 Rangers from BCO 375ths deployed to a secondary contingency FARP site within Pakistan named Objective Honda. As they arrived at that location, one of the MH-6OK Blackhawks carrying the Rangers encountered a brownout from the dust kicked up by the rotor wash and tipped over, killing 2 of the Rangers on board. The Rhino and Honda missions enabled another, more covert operation that was not filmed: a Delta strike against Taliban leader Mullah Omar's compound, known as Objective Gecko. The Rangers of BCO 375ths provided blocking positions in what the regiment described officially as a special operations raid mission. AH-6 gunships flew from Rhino to support the strike on Gecko after a FAR-P was established, and within 20 minutes of the seizure of the airfield, the little birds had arrived to refuel and rearm. In the event, Gecko, like Rhino, proved to be a dry hole largely devoid of enemy activity. After 5 hours and 24 minutes on the ground, the Rangers and supporting elements from the 160th SOA and Air Force Special Tactics collapsed their perimeters at Rhino and climbed aboard their MC-130 Combat Talon aircraft to disappear into the Afghan night. Critics argued that both operations presented significant and unnecessary risk to the Rangers and operators, particularly given the distances and the numbers of aircraft. Many of the participants still feel that the operations were essentially staged by the White House for political capital. Inexplicably, 375ths were sent back to the United States in late November 2001 as part of an ill-conceived deception plan. designed to fool the opposition into thinking American Special Operations Forces SOF had been withdrawn. They were later replaced by 175th. November 13, 2001 saw the Rangers of BCO 375ths conduct another combat drop to seize a remote desert airstrip, codenamed Objective Bastogne, to establish a FARP site for a strike force of AH-6 South. Dropping from barely 500 feet, the majority of the Rangers were injured during landings on rocky ground. The RRD also conducted a high-altitude, low-opening halo parachute jump onto Objective Bastogne in preparation for the arrival of B Company. The RRD conducted further halo and other freefall jumps, including one mission at Drop Zone Wrath to reconnoiter a dry lake bed in preparation for landing Delta's Pinzgauer trucks. Several days later, a similar operation called Relentless Strike saw a reinforced Ranger platoon in GMVs secure a desert strip Objective Anzio. To allow further AH-6 strike missions, the Rangers used the GMVs to conduct a mounted reconnaissance of a second nearby dry lake bed that was dubbed Bulge. The following day, this too became a temporary base of operations for the helicopter gunships. With the Taliban in full retreat and the USA-supported Northern Alliance, supported by Army Special Forces recapturing key cities, the Rangers assigned to Task Force Sword, now redesignated Task Force 11, were given the task of supporting the hunt for Taliban and Al-Qaeda high-value targets HVT. They spent much of their time collocated with a rotational element of SEALs from Team 6 based at the JSOC compound on Bagram Air Force Base. From late 2001, small numbers of Rangers were also attached as security and force protection to Special Forces ODAs and Advanced Force Operations elements. December 2001 was frustrating for the regiment, as CIA Special Forces, Delta operators closed in on Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden at Tora Bora in Afghanistan's eastern mountains south of Jalalabad. Multiple requests were made by both the CIA and Delta for the deployment of a Ranger battalion to assist them. The idea was for the Rangers to act as the blocking force to seal the mountain passes into Pakistan, effectively shutting off bin Laden's escape routes. Disappointingly, these requests were denied amid political arguments about minimizing the U.S. military footprint and with the complicity of Afghan militias who were ostensibly working with the Americans. Bin Laden slipped away. 2003 to 2005, minimal presence. Over the following years, the Rangers maintained a platoon at Bagram along with a troop from SEAL Team 6, 3 MH-47Es, and a pair of armed Predator. Known as an expeditionary force, this was the only JSOC presence in country. With few high-value target missions, the Rangers conducted counterinsurgency patrolling in an effort to develop local intelligence networks. Occasionally, they would launch missions targeting Al-Qaeda and associated jihadist groups. In February 2003, for example, the Rangers of Co. 275ths, reinforced with the co-elements and alongside the SEALs, launched a large-scale operation in Nimruz province against foreign fighters entering from Pakistan. By winter 2003, for the Rangers and SEAL Team 6 had been given rotational command of the Afghan theater, with either a U.S. Navy or Ranger Headquarters Olant taking command of all JS. In April 2004, the Rangers of 275ths suffered the controversial loss of CPL Pat Tillman during an insurgent ambush in Coast Province. Since Tillman was a former National Football League star who had joined the Rangers after 9/11, this attracted media attention, which redoubled when it was belatedly admitted that he had been killed by friendly fire. A year later, the Rangers' target set in Afghanistan, formerly restricted to Al-Qaeda, was finally expanded to include the Taliban and the regiment now. He began to hunt insurgent leaders, bomb makers, and facilitators throughout the country. In June 2005, they also rescued Navy SEAL combat medic Marcus Luttrell and recovered the remains of his 3 fallen comrades after a SEAL recon team was ambushed during Operation Red Wings, as depicted in the book and later film Lone Survivor. 2006 to 2008. Increasing tempo. By 2006, the Afghan insurgency was growing as the international security Assistance Force ISAF attempted to expand security into the rest of South. The Rangers launched Operation Nyland 2 in Kandahar, using a Predator UAV to track a large concentration of Taliban fighters threatening the city. After the insurgents entered Avalia, Ranger Platoon established blocking positions at one end while a SEAL Team 6 troop acted as beaters, sweeping through the valley from the other end. A reported 120 enemy were killed, with 0 casualties. To the Rangers and SEALs, due to the increasing operational tempo and what was known officially as a lower returgitating threshold, meaning that lower-level insurgents could be targeted, the Rangers in Afghanistan were reinforced the year with a second platoon. A similar operation into the Sangin Valley in Helmand Province saw 1st PTN BCO 175th surrounded by an estimated 300 insurgents, requiring multiple danger-close airstrikes to hold them back. As the Rangers' wary extracted, an MH-47 was shot down, crash landing in a nearby poppy field. A battalion sniper team, 2 battalion recon teams, and an anti-armor team held back the Taliban while orbiting. MH-47s added their mini-gun stow, the cordon of fire, and an AC. 130 that was brought on station ran through all its ammunition.
Twice.
Finally, the remaining Rangers were extracted, and the downed MH-47 was denied from the air by the 105mm M102 howitzer of the AC-130. Also in 2006, a team from the RRD working directly for JSOC conducted an operation target the leader of the SCHNE insurgent network in eastern Afghanistan. The team off 4, with an attached JTAC and an Australian Commandoon, an exchange posting, infiltrated into the mountains and established an observation post at an altitude above 10,000 feet to watch an enemy base camp around a cave network. The team later vectored in a B-1B Lancer bomber, which rained 2,000 pounds, Joint Direct Attack munitions JDAMs onto the target. Although over 100 enemy were estimated killed, Haqqani himself was not among them. It was in Afghanistan that the regiment's first Medal of Honor of Modern Times was awarded to SGT 1st Class Leroy Petrie of Deco 275ths. Under fire in Paksha province on May 26, 2008, Petrie was wounded in both legs. He continued to fight, but when he attempted to throw back an enemy grenade to save his comrades, it detonated, destroying Petrie's right hand. He applied his own tourniquet while still being engaged by insurgents and directed the return fire of his fellow Rangers until he could be extracted safely. 2009 to 2011. Afghan Surge and Team Merrill. By 2009, Gen McChrystal had placed the Rangers in sole command of JSOTF. Operations in Afghanistan, the so-called Afghan Surge was in full swing, and this brought JSOC units into the theater. While the SEALs took the east and Delta took the north, a full Ranger battalion was based in Kandahar as Task Force South, and Rangers also manned Task Force Central and Coast. The Ranger task forces used their Stryker and MRAP vehicles on occasion, but the majority of their operations were conducted by helicopter, due both to the distances involved and the ever-present threat of improvised explosive devices, IEDs. According to a brutally frank JSOC briefing, the task force's mission was to conduct offensive operations in Afghanistan to degrade TBL, Taliban leadership, AQL, Al-Qaeda leadership, HQNL, Haqqani leadership and their networks, in order to enable coalition and Afghan forces to expand. Designated security zones. These offensive operations by time and space. 4. Conventional regional commanders to accomplish the COIN, counterinsurgency task. We are not encumbered with those COIN tasks. We don't run any shuras or anything like that. We are focused on manhunting. While the Rangers tried to use techniques similar to those perfected in Iraq, see next chapter to map Taliban networks through their use of cell phones. The Afghan insurgents were surprisingly adept at communications, security, overhead imagery from recon aircraft and long-loader drones, known as ISR, intelligence surveillance reconnaissance, became the primary means of tracking targets in Afghanistan. With the JSOC's surge and the transfer of the theater headquarters to the Rangers, regimental leadership pushed their teams to match the kind of tempo seen at the height of operations in Iraq. Predictably, this had to results: more dry holes, and a further lowering of the targeting threshold. As Rangers went after local insurgents in an effort to assist the regular, ground-holding U.S. Marine Corps and U.S. Army units, at the same time, the Rangers continued to target insurgent HVTs on the task force's Joint Target List Afghanistan. In late August 2009, AHGO 175th and elements from 375ths were involved in a massive contact with up to 400 Uzbek and foreign fighters when the Rangers assaulted an insurgent training camp in the mountains of eastern Paksha. The insurgents were well-sighted and prepared fighting positions that had resisted preparatory airstrikes. The battle eventually involved HIMARS fire from Bagram and close air support from F-15Es, A-10AS, and even B-1BS. 2 Rangers were killed in action and a number injured, including a dog handler who was wounded by a suicide bomber. The following year, the regiment also embarked upon a strategy of going after the Taliban in their base areas in Kandahar and Helmand provinces, the so-called Ranger Surge. Initially known as Team Darby, but soon renamed Team Merrill, both names in honor of legendary Ranger leaders. The plan centered on reinforcement from 2 platoons up to a company initially from 275ths and increasing the length of their tour by 2 months. Rangers and most Zav were still serving 3 to 4 month rotations at that time. These platoons would conduct a night movement into a Taliban base area. One platoon would move into a previously identified compound or group of neighboring compounds and begin to fortify the location, while the other platoon would move into a named area of interest nigh, conducting an advanced 2 contact or raiding identified insurgent compounds. Once the NAI operation is complete, those Rangers involved would rendezvous with their sister platoon and, having stirred up the proverbial hornet's nest, would await attack by the insurgents. These operations soon expanded to 2 consecutive days, with the Rangers extracting on the 3rd night. During these Team Merrill missions, they were supported by day by a 10A Thunderbolt Es, aka Warthogs, and AH-64D Longbow Apaches, and at night by AH-6 South. The Rangers killed hundreds of insurgents during these operations in what were some of the largest and fiercest firefights of the war. In these Taliban base areas, any armed male of fighting age was a legitimate target, since the Rangers operated under Operation Enduring Freedom rules of engagement, ROE, rather than the more restrictive ROE required by ISAF. On one such mission, Operation Doberman, in Zari-Panjay, 2D and 3D, Pints from Deco, 175th, along with an Afghan partnered force, mentored by a Special Forces ODA, deployed into a series of 3 compounds before patrolling into an NAI. When the Rangers returned to their compounds, they were attacked by a large and aggressive Taliban force. The insurgents probed each flank of the compounds looking for weaknesses, and when they broke tact, they would force local children to walk along with them as they changed positions, knowing that the Rangers or supporting air assets would not engage. The insurgents would then wait until the gunships had to leave for refueling before attacking from another direction. This 2-day battle saw a Ranger medic killed and a number of Rangers seriously wounded. When the Chinooks flew in to recover them, every member of the Ranger strike force would fire into likely or identified enemy firing points for a full 30 seconds to help the helicopter to get in and out safely. In another Team Merrill operation, an MH-47 set off a tripwired grenade as it landed, while a Ranger stepped on a mine as the Taliban had booby-trapped certain buildings in their own compounds. During Operation Matthews in October 2010, 1 Ranger was killed and 12 seriously wounded, and by the end of the year, 16 Rangers but hundreds of insurgents had died on Team Merrill missions. 2011 to 2013, courageous restraint. Team Merrill was eventually stood down in 2011 due to these rising casualty figures and dwindling targets. The new head of JSOC, ADM, Bill McRaven, also pushed his units into the counterinsurgency effort, establishing the Village Stability Operations Program. This VSO saw SEALs, Army Special Forces, MARSOC units, and British SAS teams deployed to outlying villages. To live alongside the civilians, establishing local security forces in an blood effort to reduce insurgent influence. The Rangers, however, remained on strike operations, mounting night raids aimed at facilitating the VSO program by reducing the insurgent threat. August 2011 saw a Ranger assault element conduct an offset insertion, patrolling into objective Lefty Grove in the Tangi Valley of Wardak Province. Hunting a Taliban leader, the reinforced platoon cleared the target compound and detained a number of suspects. Several squirters, potentially including their target, managed to escape on foot during a firefight at the objective. And, with no cutoff group available, a standby immediate reaction force of SEALs was launched in a pair of Air National Guard CH-47D Chinooks. As one of the Chinooks, call sign Extortion 17, flared into land, an insurgent RPG team managed to hit the rear rotor. In the consequent crash, an explosion, 38 people were killed. The Rangers immediately released their detainees and ran almost 2.5 miles to the crash site. Sadly, they recovered no survivors from the blazing wreck, and 2 Rangers were wounded by ammunition on board the helicopter cooking off. The Ranger platoon stayed on the ground until the next day, recovering the bodies of the fallen SEALs and aviators. Afghan political intervention, in the aftermath of the mistaken shooting of a number of civilians by Rangers during a raid in Gardez in February 2010, resulted in several changes to RO4 night raids. Firstly, there was an insistence upon Afghans leading the raid. The minimum on Ranger operations was 7 Afghans. Secondly, new restrictions required a call out by loudspeaker to be attempted again by the partnered Afghans, which often resulted in insurgents squirting from the target. And thirdly, all operations shot to be cleared through an Afghan authority, known as the Operational Coordination Group. A JSOC briefing noted that night raids typically proceeded in the following manner. We isolate the compound and do a tactical call-out. 80% of the time, no shots are even fired. The targeted individuals comply with the guidance given in their native language. We separate the women and children from the military-age males. Begin tactical questions, begin sensitive site exploitation, and get all the communication devices, pocket litter, etc., off the objective. Even after the tragedy of Extortion 17, the Rangers' worst day in Afghanistan was still to come. During a raid in October 2013, Rangers triggered a dozen IEDs hidden within and around a target compound, and 2 Rangers, an attached cultural support team member, and a military policeman were killed in the blasts. 8 other Rangers were seriously, including a number with life-altering wounds, when a squatter detonated a suicide bomb vest, and a further 6 Rangers were later wounded by a second suicide bomber. Explosive ordnance disposal specialists found and rendered safe no fewer than 10 additional IEDs at the site. At the time of writing, Rangers were still deployed in Afghanistan in support of counter-terrorism operations, as part of both Operation Freedoms Sentinel, which replaced Operation Enduring Freedom in 2014, and the ISAF-led Operation Resolute Support. Operation IRAQI Freedom Iraq, 2003 to 2010. For the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the Ranger Regiment was again placed under the direct command of JSOC, forming an integral part of Joint Special Operations Task Force 20 based out of Arar in Saudi Arabia. In the official history, there is scant mention of Task Force 20 and none of its JSOC units. The 75th Ranger Regiment, a quick reaction force from the 82D Airborne Division and 1 high-mobility artillery rocket system, HIMARS, composed Task Force 20, another SOF task force assigned to the west and the south. Not mentioned was a squadron from Delta, later increased to 2, who formed Task Force Wolverine, nor elements from the U.S. Air Force, 24th Special Tactics SQN, along with supporting 160th SOAR assets. One of the first missions assigned to the regiment in the operational plan, was very much a traditional Ranger task: the seizure of Baghdad International Airport, then known as Sodom International. The plan called for a helicopter assault force from Task Force 22, paved the way for a Ranger combat drop to secure the airfield for the arrival of follow-on forces from the 2D BDE of 82D Airborne Division. Full-scale exercises were conducted at Forts Benning and Bragg in preparation for this mission, but it was eventually canceled on March 24th due to the unexpectedly rapid advance of conventional forces through southern Iraq. A platoon from 375th Rangers was also tasked to protect Task Force Hunter, the code name for the HIMARS unit attached to Task Force 20. They were joined by an 82D ABN Div anti-tank company, mounted in tow, 2 equipped Humvees to defend against Iraqi armor. An additional force protection element raised from BCO to 75ths and christened Task Force Spear was given the task of guarding the resupply convoys that entered Iraq to rearm and refuel the HIMARS of Task Force Hunter. The Rangers and Task Force 20 were supported by another unusual component: main battle tanks. Team Tank harked back to Colonel William Darby's cannon company for half-tracks mounting 75mm howitzers that were deployed alongside Darby's Rangers in Italy in 1943. The idea was to provide Task Force 20 and the Rangers with an armored capability to destroy Iraqi tanks. The job eventually fell to the tankers of Co. 2D BN 70th Armor Regiment, who provided 10 M1A1 Abrams tanks and associated support vehicles. For Federation of Offensive Operations, Team Tank was placed under the temporary command of 175th Rangers. After the cancellation of the Baghdad International Airport mission, Rangers from Co. 375ths conducted a nighttime combat drop to seize a desert airstrip near Al Mkane, codenamed Objective Roadrunner, to act as a forward staging area, and FARP, the same company, carried out a similar jump on March 24th. A day earlier, a Co. 175th mounted in GMVs, along with a battalion HQ element, secured Objective Coyote, another desert airstrip, in preparation for offensive operations against Objectives Sidewinder South and Sidewinder North. After a delay, due to the infamous dust storm that halted almost all coalition operations in southern and western Iraq, the Rangers seized Objective Sidewinder South, the airfield and garrison at Nukaib. On March 27th, Co. 175th, along with the attached AT company, relieved a Co. The latter, supported by Battalion 120mm mortar, AH-6 South and Task Force Hunter, went on to attack Objective Sidewinder North, the military garrison in the village of Mudasis. March 26 and 27, Objectives Beaver and Serpent. On March 26, SEALs from Team 6 and Rangers from BCO to 75ths conducted a heliborne assault against Objective Beaver. According to the official history, in a swift and decisive raid, the Rangers overran the lakeside palace that constituted the research center, although not without a fight from its occupants. Beaver was the code name for the Al-Qadisiyah Research Center, suspected chemical and biological warfare facility located south of Theoditha Dam Sea below. 5.8. The operation against Objective Beaver represents a typical template for 8. A helicopter assault force raid. For MH-60Ks would deliver Ranger chalks. It's onto 4 points around the target building to establish blocking positions and isolate the objective. A pair of MH-47Es would deposit the SEAL team. 6 assault force directly outside the target building, while 2 MH-6S darted overhead, carrying SEAL aerial sniper teams. Dedicated gunship support was provided by a flight of AH-6 South and 2 MH-6OL direct action penetrators, DAPS Blackhawk gunships. To further, MH-47Es orbited nearby, carrying a Ranger immediate reaction force and CSAR element. As the helicopters approached the target location, they began to receive enemy fire, and all 2 MH-47Es and 3 MH-60Ks would be damaged by ground fire. As the Rangers raced from the Blackhawks, one was shot in the back, the round penetrating his body and lodging in the front trauma plate of his body armor. He was flown to Objective Roadrunner, where a surgical team on a waiting C-130 stabilized his condition. A crew chief from the 060th SOAR was also severely wounded by small arms fire and was likewise evacuated to Roadrunner. The Rangers on the objective engaged numerous enemy, both uniformed and militia, while the SEALs conducted a sensitive site exploitation SSE searching for evidence of chemical or biological munitions. After 45 minutes on the ground, during which the supporting AH-6 South and DAPS drove off a number of enemy attempts to reinforce the research center, the Rangers collapsed their perimeter, climbed aboard THEM H-60Ks, and headed back to RR. On March 27th, the Rangers of ACO 375ths made a night parachute drop to seize Objective Serpent, a critical Iraqi military airfield later known as H-1, at Air Base. After a bumpy ride to the target, thanks to Iraqi air defenses, the Rangers dramatically recited the Ranger Creed as they stood up and prepared to make their static line jump from 500 feet, which led to more than a dozen injuries. These were exacerbated by the fact that each Ranger carried in excess of 220 pounds of ammunition and equipment, and the expectation of having to hold the objective against Iraqi counterattacks for an unknown length of time in typical airborne manner. Jumping with the Rangers was a detachment from the Army's 27th Engineer Battalion, who quickly went to work clearing the runway of a number of immobilized vehicles the Iraqis had dragged in to block the tarmac. The Rangers fanned out and secured the immediate area, which appeared devoid of Iraqi military. A number of Ranger all-terrain vehicles had been parachuted in for casualty evacuation, and these were used to recover the more seriously injured Rangers from the drop zone. The Rangers and engineers had H-1 Air Base operational and ready for follow-in forces in just 5 hours. This was significant to the coalition war effort, as the U.S. Army's official history makes clear. The jump onto Objective Serpent was a relatively small operation in the scope of the war in Iraq. However, it was a critical part of the overall campaign in the western desert of Iraq. H-1 Air Base became a mission support site staging area for other operations across the western half of Iraq, including the BCO 3D Ranger Battalion assault on Haditha Dam, April 1st to 9th, the Haditha Dam. Perhaps the Rangers' biggest operation of the invasion was the seizure of Objective Links, the Haditha High Dam complex stretching for over 6 miles on the Euphrates River. Planners feared that Saddam Hussein might deliberately breach the dam, releasing nearly 2 cubic miles of water to flood advancing coalition forces. The fact that Saddam had ordered oil fields set ablaze during Iraqi retreat from Kuwait in 1991 lent credence to this fear. The dam was also one of 4 identified key deployment areas for Iraqi forces and Task Force 20 believed that tying them down there would hasten the end of the war. The surrounding area was home to an Iraqi armored battalion, with an infantry company apparently stationed at the dam itself. These forces were supported by Saddam Fedayeen irregulars, numerous South African-made 155mm howitzers, and a heavy concentration of AA guns and surface-to-air missile batteries. The one advantage the Rangers possessed was that the Iraqi defenses were configured to face a threat from the south, while the Rangers strike from the west. They also benefited from covert shaping operations conducted by Delta, riding into the area on 9 specially modified all-terrain vehicles fitted with infrared headlights and special mufflers that reduced engine noise. The operators marked the locations of Iraqi defenses that were later destroyed by preparatory airstrikes prior to the Ranger mission. The mission had originally been given to Delta, with the Rangers assigned to conduct deception operations to draw off the enemy, but due to the expected level of resistance, the task of seizing the dam was passed to the regiment. A total of 154 Rangers from BCO 375ths, along with 3D PTN CCO, 2 attached 375th sniper teams, a 120mm mortar section, a battalion HQ element, and a team of mechanics to maintain their vehicles would eventually depart H-1 Air Base for an overland assault. This ground assault force would be accompanied by a detachment from Delta who would guide the Rangers into the target area, and a small team of specialists from the U.S. Air Force's 24th Special Tactics SQN who would control aerial fires. The Rangers would be mounted in a mix of GMVs and cargo Humvees, 9 men crammed into each vehicle. At the same time, a KO 375ths would secure the vital Ramadi highway bridge to the south. The task of seizing and holding the southwestern end of the dam, establishing blocking positions, was given to 1st PTN-B Co. 2D PTN-B Co was assigned the northeastern end. 3D PTN from C Co would secure the dam's power station and deploy blocking positions to intercept any enemy. Reinforcements dispatched from nearby Haditha. The 3D platoon of B Co remained at H1 Air Base as Force Protection and Task Force QRF, supported by a pair of AH-6S. The ground assault force drove directly onto the dam at dawn on April 1, 2003. They faced little initial resistance, and the key objectives were secured without bloodshed. This would soon change as the Rangers at the northeastern end of the complex began to receive effective RPG fire. One of the sniper teams engaged a number of these Iraqi RPG gunners at ranges stretching to over 1,000 yards, and the firing ceased. The snipers were equipped with both 7.62 x 51mm M24 and SR-25 rifles, and 50 cal M107s that could engage targets out to a reported 2,000+ yards. As they also acted as forward observers for the Rangers. 120mm mortar. As elements of 2D PTN maneuvered to push out security too, the northeast and Iraqi Army truck approached and was engaged with .50 cal fire from the Rangers' GMVs. The truck held a reinforced squad of Iraqi troops. 5 of them were killed initially, and the survivors became involved in an extended firefight with the Rangers. Concurrently, the AH-6 South engaged and destroyed an Iraqi bunker and an S-60 AA gun. Meanwhile, 3D PTN-C Co also became embroiled in a firefight with troops stationed at Objective Cobalt, the power plant and transformer buildings. One squad provided suppressive fire, while the other Rangers leapfrogged forward to capture a number of Iraqis. While 3D PTN managed to clear the majority of the buildings on Cobalt, they would suffer repeated counterattacks by Iraqi forces, including fanatical Fedayeen militia. During one of these counterattacks, an Iraqi truck was destroyed by a Ranger anti-armor team with an M3 Carl Gustav Raz. On top of the dam, the Iraqis began what would become a terrifyingly, familiar routine for the Rangers of 1st and 2D PTNs. 82mm mortar barrages. The sniper teams in the AH-6 South, along with supporting strike aircraft, and about 12 fire missions from a HIMARS battery located back at H1 Air Base, eventually managed to suppress most of the mortar firing points, but the bombs continued to rain down for a number of days. One mortar position located on a rocky island received the attentions of both a Ranger FGM-148 Javelin, ATGM, and a PR of 1,000 pounds bombs dropped from U.S. Air Force A-10AS. On April 2nd, the mortar would be joined by an even greater threat as the Iraqi 155mm howitzers began to periodically pound the Ranger positions. Although an estimated 350 plus 155mm shells landed in and around the dam, remarkably not one Ranger was killed by the bombardment, although several sustained serious wounds. They including one young Ranger who was blinded by an artillery fragment. When the 160th SOR were alerted to the azarity of the casualty, they flew a desperate daylight mission to extract him. There were also a number of lucky escapes, including 3 Rangers who were occupying a hold-down position in their GMV. A 155mm round landed on the edge of their position, blowing all 3 from the vehicle and lifting and moving the GMV sideways, but none of the soldiers suffered anything worse than temporary hearing loss. Eventually, airstrikes directed in by the Special Tactics Combat Controllers against artillery positions identified by the RRD began to reduce the indirect fire threat. The Rangers and their Combat controllers eventually destroyed 29 Iraqi AFVs, 3 trucks, 24 mortar positions, and almost 30 of the 155mm howitzers, and inflicted some 230 Iraqi infantry casualties. At about this stage, the men were ordered to sheaf, despite being in the middle of a pitched battle. By the 5th day of the operation, enemy indirect fire had been largely silenced, and the Rangers managed to expand their perimeter, overcoming the last pockets of resistance. A pair of M1A1 Abrams main battle tanks, dispatched from Task Force 20's team tank, arrived on April 6th to reinforce them. While combat operations continued above ground, a former Special Forces engineer worked tirelessly below ground with the dam's Iraqi civilian staff to repair both damage from Iraqi artillery and years of neglect that had left the dam in a perilous state. The plan to seize the dam had called for the Rangers to be on the ground for 24 hours, but to be prepared for a possible 48-hour stay. It was in fact a week before 3DPTN from BCO eventually relieved the battle-worn Rangers at the dam, who were flown back to H-1 Air Base. To date, this is the longest recorded ground combat involving a Ranger unit since Vietnam. 4 Rangers were wounded at the objective and were flown out by helicopters of the 160th SOAR. 3 others were killed while manning a blocking position interdicting the adjacent highway on April 3rd. Civilian SUV approached the position just after midnight, and 2 women, one visibly pregnant, ran from the vehicle in apparent distress. Several Rangers went forward to assist them, but, sensing danger, their captain ordered them back and approached the women himself. As he neared the SUV, the vehicle detonated, killing the captain and 2 other Rangers, instantly and badly wounding a 4th. These were the first Americans to be killed by a suicide bomber in Iraq. They would be far from the last. Other April operations. April 1st also saw other Rangers involved in a high-profile Task Force 20 mission, the rescue of PVT Jessica Lynch from an Iraqi hospital. Lynch had been part of an army maintenance company that had taken a wrong turn in the city of Nasiriyah on March 23rd and driven into an Iraqi ambush. Lynchy and 5 other U.S. personnel were captured. After a tip-off from an informant, planning began for a rescue operation. While SEAL Team 6 conducted the breach into the hospital to rescue Lynch, the Rangers of A and B, 175th were infiltrated into the hospital grounds by U.S. Marine Corps CH-46 Sea Knight helicopters to isolate the building and prevent Iraqi reinforcements from interfering with the operation. A smaller Ranger element also arrived as part of a ground assault force in GMVs. The Rangers wearing bulky, mission-oriented protective posture MOP suits. The current term for chemical, biological, radiation, and nuclear protection encountered no enemy on the objective, although the mission was not without danger. The CH-46s received RPG fire during their approach, and a low-flying MH-6 was nearly downed over the objective by a Ranger breaching charge. After the SEALs successfully extracted Lynch, the Rangers were informed that the bodies of a number of deceased Americans from the ambushed convoy were buried outside the hospital. With no digging tools, the Rangers instead dug with their hands. NCOs assigned the more junior enlisted men to security, while the NCOs themselves conducted the grisly task of digging the bodies out. 9 were eventually recovered. They were carefully loaded onto the GMVs to be repatriated to their families in the United States. On the night of April 8th, the first Joint Ranger operation with Team Tank saw the armor supporting an attack on objective Camel K2 airfield near Beji, north of Tikrit. This mission ended in the loss of 1 tank. Operating under night vision, the M1A1 managed to drive into an open pit and flip over, trapping the crew inside. Rangers assisted in their eventual rescue. The tank itself, completely immobilized, still held sensitive items that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands, so it was destroyed. With 2 120mm rounds from another M1A1. Sadly, a Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment GMV was mistakenly engaged by one of Team Tank's M1A1 south and destroyed, killing an attached combat controller from the 24th Special Tactics Squadron. On April 11th, the CO of 175th and Team Tank were assigned to attack another Iraqi airstrip, Objective Badger at Al-Sarha. With Ranger 120mm mortar, firing in direct support, and AH-6S operating overhead, Team Tank and the GMV mounted, conducted a mounted assault directly onto the airfield. The tanks used their main guns to roust out Iraqi infantry as the Rangers dismounted to systematically clear the main buildings. The Abrams also destroyed at least 2 elderly Iraqi T-55 tanks in a close-range action. Second objective, known as Falcon, was also secured to allow Rangers to recover the remains of a downed USA FF-15E aircrew. Other elements of Team Tank SECO from 175th and Delta deployed blocking positions along Highway 1, the main north-south route through Iraq, to interdict escaping Ba'ath Party officials. As they were deployed so deep into western Iraq, the Rangers displayed large U.S. national flags on their vehicles in an attempt to stave off any potential fratricide by coalition aircraft. On April 14th, the Rangers conducted an operation that would become a blueprint for the unit's immediate future in Iraq. With a Co-275ths isolating the SLD, building a helicopter assault force from SEAL Team 6 attempted to capture Abu Abbas, the terrorist mastermind of the Achille Lauro cruise ship, hijacking in 1985 when a disabled Jewish-American passenger, Leon Klinghoffer, was murdered. The first target proved to be a dry hole, but information led to a second site being raided later that day. BCO 275th secured. The perimeter in BCO 175th cleared surrounding buildings, while the SEALs searched the target house. The 175th Rangers inadvertently captured their quarry when they detained a suspicious individual, carrying a number of passports, a satellite phone, and some $35,000 in cash. Abu Abbas was one of the first HVTs captured by the Rangers in Iraq. After Baghdad fell, the Rangers transitioned to supporting Task Force 20 in the hunt for the Ba'athist leaders on the infamous Deck of Cards mission support site. Fernandez, a helicopter base named after a Delta Paperator killed during the war, was established in Baghdad's Green Zone, and 275ths moved in, alongside the Delta Squadron, to begin manhunting operations across Iraq.